Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jashoda Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. 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 Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. 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 Jashoda Nandana Braja Jannaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Nitai Gaura Haribol 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 Gaura Haribol Nitai Gaura Haribol Shri Radha Madan Mohan ki jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai Nitai Gaur Pramanandi Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshatarine Hare Krishna. So first of all, my deep gratitude to His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu and Nirakula Mataji for inviting me here year after year and guiding this wonderful community that really serves as a wonderful example for the rest of us in this movement. And Vaisheshika Prabhu himself serves as a wonderful example for devotees like myself. And so I'm really grateful for your hospitality here, and also to Srivas Pandit Prabhu for hosting me, and for all of you for the many ways in which you make this seminar possible, the devotees who cook, and the devotees who do the Kirtan, and those who play the mridanga for me. And so thank you all so much. I look forward to coming here so much every year. Really, I come to ISV for my own benefit, mostly, and I hope I can convey something that'll be useful to all of you as well. But really, it gives me inspiration all year long, the time that I spend here in your association. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Last year's seminar was on the topic of forgiveness, and it was a topic that had a lot to do with our personal life and our challenges and our emotions. Today's, this year's seminar is going back to my more usual mode of philosophical sorts of seminars. The topic of the seminar, the title is called The Allure of Mayavada Philosophy and How to Resist It. This seminar really is, like all seminars, but especially this one, is an offering to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who in his own pranam mantra, which I've been told he wrote himself, the second verse, Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. He sets forward his own mission statement. And of all the different things that he could have written, that could have been stated, he says particularly, well, Gauravani Pracharine, that's the general purpose, is to spread the message, the voice, the Vani of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But specifically, he mentions this one thing, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine, to deliver the Western countries from impersonalism and voidism. So this was something that was very, very dear to Srila Prabhupada's heart. And in fact, it goes back even further when he wrote his Vyasa Puja offering to his spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Then he wrote this beautiful poem. And in that poem, the favorite verse, Srila Prabhupada was told, the favorite verse of his spiritual master was this one, Absolute is sentient, thou hast proved. Impersonal calamity, thou hast removed. So, focusing again on this point that God is a person and removing this idea of impersonalism. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was very pleased by this verse. So, in fact, so focused was Srila Prabhupada on this message that devotees who read his books, both newcomers and those who are seasoned readers of Prabhupada's books, are often surprised or mildly irritated by the frequency with which Srila Prabhupada takes every single opportunity available to argue against impersonalism. I mean, he never lets an opportunity slip by. Even when it seems sometimes that the verse has very little to do with impersonalism, Prabhupada will find a reason to bring it in, and he will at least add a sentence to make that point. And Hayagriva Prabhu, in the Hare Krishna Explosion, his really fun to read and enlightening account of the early days of the movement in New York City, he talks about how this was something that Srila Prabhupada was fascinated by not fascinated by, focused on right from the beginning of his time in the United States, when he was speaking to an audience of people who would have not known anything about Mayavada or Impersonalism. For some time, he and others, the early attendees of Prabhupada's classes, thought that Prabhupada must have had some kind of real fight with this group in India called the Mayavadis, and he's still fuming about them here in the United States so many months later. And then at some point, he says, we realized Prabhupada was actually talking about us. We were the Mayavadis that he was trying to purify. So Prabhupada was very focused on this point, and it can sometimes seem like we kind of know everything there is to know about Mayavad philosophy because we've read its description and its refutation so many hundreds of times if we read Prabhupada's books regularly. And yet, if it is the case that this impersonalism is the primary risk, danger for the life of a devotee, then we often know, sadly, very little about its power, its allure, even its glory. Right? But the original title of this seminar, which I kind of became too afraid to present, was it was The Glories of Mayavad Philosophy and How to Refute It. And the reason I said I thought of that originally was because we really, I mean, say you're into professional sports, okay, and you're preparing for a match. What's the number one mistake you can make in terms of not being prepared for the tournament? Yeah, underestimating the opposition. And too often, both in our personal lives and in dealing with others who we talk to, we turn Mayavad into a caricature. We talk about it as if it's a joke, and as if it's so funny and so crazy that anyone who would accept it would obviously be crazy. Okay, and therefore it's something that could possibly not affect us in any way, right? And that's dangerous in two different directions. One is that when we're talking to people, if we take their position to be just funny and to be foolish, to be stupid, then we insult them, right? We're basically insulting their intelligence, saying only someone as crazy as you would accept a philosophy as useless as Mayavad, right? And that's not good for a preacher. That's not appropriate for a devotee trying to give Krishna's message if we dishonor or disrespect the person we're talking to by insulting their intelligence. And the second thing it does is it puts us in grave risk, because if this is the final snare of Maya, as Srila Prabhupada said, then we treat it way too casually. Right? Way too casually. If Maya leaves this as her final snare, it must be her best weapon. Right? You don't use your final snare. You don't leave your worst and weakest weapon for the end. You keep your final attack, your final approach to be the best, to be your strongest weapon if everything else fails. The wealth fails, and the prestige fails, and the knowledge fails, and everything else that Maya has for us. Janma, Aishwarya, Shruta, Shri. Then she pulls out her best weapon. So it's doubly riskful, right? And so really we ought to appreciate the glories of Mayavad philosophy. It's one of the, in its best forms, it is one of the finest philosophical systems this world has known, period. And Shankaracharya was one of the most brilliant men this world has ever seen. There's a reason why Mayavad philosophy pervades every corner of this globe, whether they call it Mayavad or not. And there is a reason why we can slip into it so easily, is because it's actually a brilliant philosophical system that on its own terms makes a lot of sense. And we need to understand why it makes sense in order that we may approach it appropriately, right? So number one, this seminar is not about going out to bash the Mayavadis, although occasionally that might feel like fun. That's really not the intent, to go out and just, attack and to make fun of and to disrespect. No. And the purpose of this is actually not even to point fingers at others, although we have to be able to recognize impersonalism where we find it. That often begins right here, right? It often begins in our own lives and in our own ways. So I want to start by asking all of you a question, just a very simple question. What do you think of? What kinds of ideas, concepts, perspectives do you think of when you think of the word Mayavad? If I say Mayavad philosophy, or if I say impersonalism, what comes to mind for you? What do you think of? Please raise your hand and someone will bring you a mic. Yes. Okay, yes, Prabhu.
Run.
So on that point of run, okay, this seminar is going to be structured in three ways, three parts. We're going to talk about the first part is going to be the opponent, where we understand fully what Mayavad philosophy is in all its glory. Then the second part is going to be the battle, which is going to be the arguments that our acharyas and the previous Vaishnava acharyas give against Mayavad. And this will include, after I present to you the full force of the well-developed Mayavad philosophy of Shankaracharya and his followers, we will also briefly talk about the more anemic forms of Mayavad that you find in our world that are half-baked and not quite worked out. Those are really easy to deal with when you know how to deal with the real thing, okay? When you know how to deal with the actual system, then the anemic ones are actually not very scary. And then the popular forms of it. And then the third part, so the opponent, the battle, and then the peace treaty, okay? And the peace treaty is actually going to talk about how these two sides can come together on certain terms. And that's really actually Mahaprabhu's wonderful contribution. So those are going to be the three parts. However, because the seminar is structured in this way, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, to this point of run that Vaisheshika Prabhu just said, Mahaprabhu says in his conversations with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he says, Mayavada bhashya shuniloy hoy sarvanash. If you listen to Mayavad philosophy, the commentary of Shankaracharya and his followers, then hoy sarvanash, everything is destroyed in terms of our bhakti. Okay, so my task in the first part of the seminar is actually to tell you Mayavada bhashya shunaya. I'm going to tell you this Mayavad philosophy. It's going to be okay as long as you stick for the second part of the seminar. Okay? So everyone here has to promise me 100% that this seminar, more than any other, you have to stick through the end, okay? No coming in and then saying, disappearing after halfway. Otherwise, I might leave a group of half-converted Mayavadis for Vaisheshika Prabhu to deal with after I'm gone. And that's not going to be good for future invitations. So everyone has to promise, okay? Yeah, you're going to stick through this to the end. Otherwise, there's really no reason to listen to Mayavad philosophy. One can go on chanting Hare Krishna very nicely and become a pure devotee. And we ought not to get confused by such things. But there's a reason to listen to it, and we'll hear from Prabhupada why in just a minute. But it's either run now or stick through to the end. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about your comment about run. What else comes to mind? Ideas and perspectives? Yes.
There is nothing, like nothing is real, like no one is real.
Yes. So nothing is real, everything is Maya, right? The world is not real, we are not real. Excellent. Yes?
And there is so much suffering that I want to sleep and forget everything.
Yeah, so maybe some sense of escapism, that there's so much suffering, and suffering is caused by individuality. So let me just, go away. Let me just disappear. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Misinterpretation of real truth.
Okay, misinterpretation of truth, particularly misinterpretation of Shastra or scripture. Excellent.
Spiritual suicide.
Spiritual suicide. So getting rid of our own individuality. Excellent.
Ultimately, no personal form. No personal form, ultimately.
No personal form for ourselves or the Lord. Good. Yes.
I am God.
I am God. Okay, those three key words there. Yes.
There are many forms, you can worship any of them.
Yes. So if God has no form, then that's one idea. Otherwise, there are many forms, and all of them are just as fine as any other. Good.
They also say that Maya is higher than God, because God becomes illusion.
So they don't say that. This is our criticism against them, yes? But the idea that at least part of God or Brahman can be under illusion, can be under Maya. The concept of Maya is crucial, yes?
Brahman is the ultimate one reality, and everything else, including Lord's form and our individuality, are Maya.
Excellent. So Brahman is the one single reality, and everything else is illusion. So I think those are enough suggestions. We get a good sense of what we popularly think of as impersonalism, and nothing you said is wrong. But I, in fact, just recently, I think Srivas Prabhu was showing me last night a Janmashtami greeting video that he had received from some relatives, and it was about Krishna, and it was talking about how Krishna is the divinity within you, and Krishna is the example of that man who had achieved the highest divinity, and therefore sets the immortal yogi who sets an example for all of us, for what we can achieve too. Right? So this was Janmashtami greetings instead of celebrating Krishna's birth, trying to get rid of Krishna more or less. So it's there everywhere. It's not something that has gone away in these years. It's not something that will go away. A few years ago, I was at a Hindu youth festival in London, and this was quite some years ago when I was doing my graduate work in Oxford, and we all went there. Several of us went there. And during the festival, there was a whole area with exhibits and booths of different spiritual organizations, Hindu organizations, that were participating in the festival. And what was really interesting, I walked around to each one, and every single spiritual organization was either named after their guru, their founder, or they worshipped their guru as God. Except for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, every single organization there was either named after their guru or they worshipped their guru as God. That's how pervasive it is. This idea, I don't think anyone mentioned, but my guru is God, is another very common form of Mayavad that we see, right? And it's pervasive more or less everywhere. In fact, dare I say, Mayavad or impersonalism is the default position in the material world. Unless we struggle, unless we try our hardest, and we're most vigilant to walk the path of personalism, we will by default slip into impersonalism. The reason is because that's why we chose to come to the material world to begin with, right? Is we wanted our shot at being Krishna. And that's essentially what Mayavada is about, right? Is taking the position of the Lord, of being the central person. And so that's why we're here. That's what we're going to slip into unless we are very vigilant. And in fact, historically speaking, if we can look at many religious organizations, Vaishnava organizations that have over time gradually slipped into some form of impersonalism or another. If you look at the course of their history, right, it becomes very easy to go down that path. It's not at all difficult. There's two default positions in the material world. One is impersonalism and the other is bhakti. Bhakti is the deepest default because that's who we are. Jivera swarup hoy krishnera nitya das. That's who we are at the deepest level. But unless we're connected to that, the reason we're here in the material world, the surface default level is going to be Mayavada. It's going to be impersonalism. In fact, we don't even have to look at these philosophical positions to think of Mayavad philosophy. All of the things we suggested have to do with certain philosophical ideas that we hear connected with impersonalism. But impersonalism is something that is far more pervasive than we realize in our lives and in our society. Just look at the push in our society towards automation. What does automation mean? Fundamentally, it's the removal of the person from the equation. Recently, Time magazine had a cover story about the smart home. And like with most of these stories about technology, it was just effusive. It was just, dreaming about this glorious future with no attempt in the whole article to raise questions about whether this was indeed a glorious future or not. But the smart home was supposed to be one where your fridge was smart. And so when you run out of milk and you can't remember and you're at the store, it will tell you. It will tell you you're out of milk. It'll auto-generate a list for you to shop by, or even better, order it on its own from Amazon Fresh. And it's a home where certain doorknobs have sensors on them so they can tell if your temperature is rising and can automatically suggest medicine for you to take, because it'll predict in the next 2 days whatever you need to get done with work, get done now, because in 2 days you're going to fall sick, and can predict that for you. Or a house where everything is wired, so you can just talk in any room to Alexa or Google Home or whoever and have a conversation about what's happening in the day to come, what your schedule is like, and what the weather is going to be like, etc., etc., etc. We've seen the beginnings of this already. Imagine a home like this. What does it presume? It presumes that there is no one at home to call and say, do we have any milk, or are we out of milk? Or no one to remind you as you're leaving the door. There is no one at home who touches you frequently enough to say, you're feeling a little warm today. Are you okay? That happens, right? Someone touches us and goes, you feel warm. There's no one there. There's no one at home with whom you might have a conversation about your day ahead or the weather that is to come. No one stepped outside to look at the sky and say, it looks like it's going to be cloudy today. It presumes a home that has everything except persons. That's the definition of impersonalism. Right? That is what impersonalism is. That's just one example. Another example is our the emphasis on equality without valuing individuality, the emphasis on systems as opposed to persons. So many people who work in the corporate world will tell you that the HR, the human resources department, is not about humans at all. It's about maintaining certain systems and standards that the company needs. And I don't know too much about that corporate world. I don't live in it, but I can give you an example from my world, which is academia and teaching and the university system. There's something that has arisen recently called competency-based education. And what that essentially says is that it goes hand in hand with online education. And competency-based education says that we set a bar that everyone has to meet to pass a particular course. And if you demonstrate that level of knowledge and skills, then you pass that course. So you could test out of it if you're already there, or if you're not there, you can work as long as you want on an online course paced on your own in order to meet that mark. And if you meet that mark, you're good. Here's the problem with that from the perspective of an educator. It's on one level it sounds good. Why? Because it levels the playing field. It's equal. One standard for everyone. However, equality on one hand can be a great thing. As devotees, we believe in equality at the level of the spirit soul. On the other hand, equality can be a cover for impersonalism. And in this particular case, if you're a teacher, one of the most valuable things that a teacher does in a classroom situation with your students is you see where each student is at and you raise the bar according to what would be best for them. So the competency-based education sets the same bar for everyone. What that means is that those who are advanced students who come in with more experience, more knowledge, or are just smarter, they are bored in your class. And those who are struggling, for whatever reason it might be, they're frustrated because they can't make it to competency. Whereas if you've got a teacher with a personal relationship, when I've got my best students in class, I raise the bar higher for them. I expect more. I catch mistakes in their essays that I would not bother to mark for someone who is not at their level, right? Because they need to move, they need to get better. And there are other students who, if they can put the basics of a paper together and they can make the basics of an argument, I'm really happy, right? I give them good marks, I continue to encourage them, and I don't worry about the little mistakes. So that's possible only if the teacher has a personal relationship with each student, not on this level playing field sort of idea where everyone gets exactly the same treatment and exactly the same bar. So this can play out in many different contexts, in many different ways. On a more, just a more gross level, the possibility of meat eating only arises when we are capable of depersonalizing the animal, right? It's not possible to eat the flesh of any animal for whom we actually put a face on them. We actually see who they are. When I'm teaching, when I'm teaching Hinduism and Jainism in my classes, and we talk about vegetarianism, I always raise it to my students. I say, here, let me explain to you why someone might be a vegetarian or why someone might choose not to harm even an insect. I tell them, some years ago there used to be a couple of slaughterhouses in the United States for horses. Do you know that? And the students are universally horrified by that idea. Slaughterhouses for horses? How could someone possibly do something like that? As cruel. I tell them, well, there's some places in the world like France and Canada where people like horse meat. So this is why. And they find that to be cruel, and they find that to be a terrible thing to do to such a beautiful animal and an intelligent animal like a horse. The same thing if I tell them that some cultures eat dogs. If you try to eat a dog in this country, you will go to prison, period. There are laws that prevent killing of any kind for animals like dogs and cats. You'll go to prison. Why? Why is that the case? It's only because with these animals, we have a face on them. We see them as persons. Every little girl in this country grows up with dreams of horses. Every boy and girl grows up with dreams of dogs and man's best friend and having one, and even if we don't have a pet, then knowing how to relate to them as persons. We know they have feelings, they have emotions, they have a face, and we can't erase it. If we see that face on everything, we won't be able to eat them, right? So the ability to eat meat or to engage in warfare is directly a result of our ability to depersonalize human beings and animals. I'll give you one more example of the presence of impersonalism, and then we'll move on. And this has to do with our environmental devastation, the environmental challenges that our planet faces with the pollution of our air and our water and our earth and the depletion of our soils and our forests. All of this comes from our ability to devalue this world. And by devalue, I mean what? Seeing this world, okay, in impersonalist terms, merely as Maya, if we were to use philosophical terms. Merely as Maya. There's a scholar named Lance Nelson, a wonderful professor who and scholar of Advaita. He talks about this as one of the challenges of Advaita philosophy, is the fact that if we consider this world to be unreal, if we consider this world to be Maya, then why should we take care of it? If really our only goal is to release ourselves from this impersonalism, from this world, why should we look after it? Why should we care for it? The antidote for treating the world in an impersonal way is 100% personalism. There's a professor of religious studies at University of Indiana, Bloomington, named David Haberman. He's a wonderful, wonderful person and a Vaishnava at heart. He's spent so much time in Braj doing research and writing. He's written a book on the Vrajamandal Parikrama. He's written a book on the Yamuna River. And he is currently writing a book on Giriraj Govardhan. And here's what he says. Okay? There are two things in this world, two terms I want you to keep in mind: anthropocentrism and anthropomorphism. Okay? Anthropocentrism, the word anthropos means human being. Anthropocentrism is the idea that human beings are at the center of this existence, of this universe, of this cosmos. Anthropocentrism is the problem. The idea that everything in this world is meant for us. Okay? We are the pinnacle of God's creation. God has given us dominion over the earth. And we are to do with the earth's resources whatever we want. This is anthropocentrism. Anthropomorphism is the idea that we take everything in this world and we put a human image on it. We put a human face on it. We see the world in human terms. So throughout history, the Abrahamic traditions have focused on anthropocentrism, the idea that human beings are the center, the pinnacle of God's creations. And they have looked down upon anthropomorphism, those cultures that make God, they say, in the human image, that make murtis or statues of God. They consider this to be anthropomorphism. But David Haberman makes the point that in fact, in our current crisis, in the ecological crisis, it's exactly the reverse. Anthropocentrism is the problem, and anthropomorphism is the solution. Cultures that have historically put faces on aspects of nature have treated those aspects far better than those who have seen them as resources to be managed. Why should you not pollute a river? Oh, because we need the river for agriculture, we need the river for drinking water, we need the river for the fish that flow in it. Or because the river herself is a person, she's a goddess who needs to be taken care of. One is an anthropocentric model. What is this river useful to me for? And one is an anthropomorphic model. How is this river like me? You see the difference? How is this useful for me, and how is this like me? The Vaishnav culture, he argues in his multiple books, has from the very beginning put faces on everything in nature. When You go to India and you see these trees and in villages, and people hang faces on these trees and decorate the tree with a sari and consider it a devi and worship the tree. You can't cut the tree once you do that, right? It's going to be terrible. It's going to be really... And so you find, to this day, you can go to the older parts of towns and you can find trees growing in the middle of people's homes and temples and entire businesses that were built around a particular tree to keep a courtyard there just so that tree is not cut. If you put a face on every aspect of nature and say, think about the story of the Prachetas in Srimad Bhagavatam. When the Prachetas come out of the water, the Prachetas are 10 brothers. They're meditating on the order of the Lord. They've been asked to be progenitors and to rule the earth. They meditate underwater and they come out after, 10,000 years? The 10,000 years of meditation, they come up and they see that the whole world is overrun by trees. They become so angry that they produce fire from their eyes, yogic Shakti power, fire, and they burn the trees all around. The Bhagavatam says that they are determined to rid this world of its trees. Can you imagine the catastrophe that would happen? At that point, Brahma, I think it's Brahma, right? Who appears? Brahma appears. Or is it Manu? Brahma appears and he says, don't do this. Why are you doing this? Don't let your anger fly so far off the rails that you're going to kill all these trees unnecessarily. But after he tells them to stop, what does he tell the trees to do? Give their daughter in marriage to the Prachetas. Her name is Marisha. She's actually the daughter of a sage, Kandu, and an Apsara, Pramlocha, but she was abandoned at birth to the care of the trees, and the trees raised her. And the Bhagavatam says that the trees considered this girl Dohitaram, their own daughter. They ask the tree to give their daughter in marriage to the Prachetas. What does that do? They agree, and they do that. To the same person who is going to kill them, they give their daughter in marriage. They do kanyadan. What does that do? It creates a personal relationship. It puts a face on the trees. It creates a personal relationship between the trees and the Prachetas. Now you can't burn the trees because they're your father-in-law, right? And you wouldn't want to do that to your father-in-law. So it changes the perspective altogether. That's the resolution of the story, is anthropomorphism, is putting a face on the trees, treating them as human beings, making things personal again. From a British missionary perspective, anthropomorphism was low class. It was useless. It was something that was an example of what the heathens were, that they put faces and worshipped trees and rocks and things like that. And this is why they needed to be converted. And of all different forms of anthropomorphism, the very worst in their eyes was the worship of rocks, because the rocks are at the bottom of the totem pole. Worshipping animals is bad enough. Worshipping trees is yet worse. But worshipping rocks, these are the things that deserve to be at our feet, and you are worshiping them. This is the example of why you are heathens and why you are crazy. And yet, Dr. Haberman argues that it is the worship of Giriraj, it is the worship of Shalagram that serves as one of the finest antidotes we have to our environmental ecological crisis. Because it says that not just plants and trees, but even the so-called inanimate world is full of personality, that everything is a person. We know this from Bhagavatam. The earth, Bhumi, is a person. She has a voice. The Lord appears just for her. We know that all of these are persons. And impersonalism leads us directly into an ecological crisis. the sad state that the Yamuna and the Ganga are in, right, is this impersonal culture of modernity crushing the personalism that is present in Vaishnav culture. And she is a resource that we need for this, and this purpose. And as soon as we think in terms of resources rather than persons, we're in the scope of impersonalism. Okay? So, all of these examples, from environment to meat eating to automation to systems and equality, all of these ideas are all forms of impersonalism, of Mayavad, that are present in our day-to-day lives, that it becomes very easy for us to slip into in our contemporary world without even realizing that we're behaving and endorsing Mayavad. That we are acting as impersonalists in our behavior and in our attitudes. Okay? So, when Prabhupada speaks about impersonalists, yes, he's speaking about philosophical ideas and groups out there, but he's also talking about us. He's also talking about our own lives. And this will be the default position. We will blindly be led into a technologically rich world covered with screens. We will be led into the idea of resource management unless we are very conscious and very alert to resisting it. We have to work. No one has to work to be an impersonalist. You have to work to be a personalist. Impersonalism does not require any effort. Personalism does. Okay? And so, I want to begin by showing you this quotation from, if we can get the first page of the projection on the screen, please. First page of the handout. I want to begin by reading for you this quotation from Srila Prabhupada, which really hopefully gives us some inspiration for what we are about to do. Okay, so this is from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada's Purport to Adi Lila, chapter 7, text 102. He says, "The Vaishnavas are by far the greatest philosophers in the world, and the greatest among them was Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhu, whose philosophy was again presented less than 400 years later by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj. Therefore, one must know very well that Vaishnava philosophers are not sentimentalists or cheap devotees like the Sahajiyas. All the Vaishnava acharyas were vastly learned scholars who understood Vedanta philosophy fully, for unless one knows Vedanta philosophy, he cannot be an acharya. To be accepted as an acharya among Indian transcendentalists who follow the Vedic principles, one must become a vastly learned scholar in Vedanta philosophy, either by studying it or hearing it." Now, in case we think that this is just for the great acharyas, Prabhupada clarifies further in the purport. Bhakti develops in pursuance of Vedanta philosophy. This is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Tat Shaddadhana Munayo Jnana Vairagya Yuktaya Pashyantyatmani Chatmanam Bhaktya Shrutagrahitaya. The words Bhaktya Shrutagrahitaya in this verse are very important, for they indicate that bhakti must be based upon the philosophy of the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutra. Srila Rupa Goswami said, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatra Vidhim Vina Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir Utpatayeva Kalpate. Devotional service performed without reference to the Vedas, Puranas, Pancharatras, etc. must be considered sentimentalism, and it causes nothing but disturbance in society. There are different grades of Vaishnavas, Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. But to be a Madhyama Adhikari preacher, one must be a learned scholar in Vedanta Sutra and other Vedic literatures, because when bhakti develops on the basis of Vedanta philosophy, it is factual and steady. This last sentence is so valuable and so powerful. When bhakti yoga develops on the basis of Vedanta philosophy, It is factual and steady. These two things, factual and steady, means without that, our bhakti, we may get it right some of the time and not get it right the other time. We may think we're practicing bhakti when in fact it's not factual. And it's not steady, means we're not able to maintain our conviction because it's not grounded. The house has no foundation. And so when the hurricane comes in, it blows away. Right? When we face some kind of challenge, either on a personal level in our lives or an external challenge in the form of a philosophical argument, we're not able to hold on. Okay? So this is why we do what we do in this seminar, okay, is that it's there in the world around us, everywhere we look. It's there in our hearts, this impersonalism. And without learning Vedanta philosophy, at least the basics, we're not going to be able to get rid of it. If we read Prabhupada's books, he gives a very, very detailed exposition on Mayavad philosophy, particularly in this chapter from which this quote is taken, chapter 7 of Adi Lila. If you read the purports there, Prabhupada is going through pretty much all of the concepts we're going to cover in this seminar. He mentions, sometimes we won't recognize it, that, oh, this is what Prabhupada is talking about if we don't know the particular names of the theories like Adhyasa or Aropa or Mayavada or so on. But Prabhupada covers pretty much everything we're going to talk about in this seminar in terms of describing Mayavad philosophy in this chapter 7. In fact, if we read Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's dialogue with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was one of the greatest impersonalist philosophers in India at the time. He was one of the greatest logicians, scholars of Nyaya. In fact, one of his disciples was Raghunath Shiromani, who is one of the stars of logic and Nyaya in Indian history. He was his student. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Vasudev Sarvabhauma, wrote books before he became a devotee that are still read by Vedantists and scholars today. His conversion in Puri was so powerful that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he says that no one knows a touchstone until it touches iron and turns it into gold. Otherwise, a touchstone looks like a regular stone. So gold, people can more or less identify, right? Oh, it's pretty, it glitters, it's gold, it's valuable. And iron you can see, but a touchstone you cannot tell unless it touches iron and turns it into gold. This was the effect of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's conversion, is that when Mahaprabhu changed the heart of Sarvabhauma, that is when the world came to recognize that this is none other than Krishna, that Mahaprabhu is Krishna. That's a significant point, right? That his devotees understood all along. But from the world's perspective, Sarvabhauma's conversion was the powerful moment that Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami identifies when the general public said, this looks like Krishna. This must be Krishna. For someone to change the heart of someone as great and powerful as Sarvabhauma. So, everyone ready for this? Yes. Okay. We're going to do this as systematically as we can, but for this discussion, I'm going to have to stand up because we're going to need a mic. So. But I think he's turning it on.
No, on the mute at the top.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Krishna. Good. And that's, thank you. Okay, so here we go. So the debate between the personalists and the impersonalists, the Mayavadis and Vaishnavas, has been going on for thousands of years, quite literally, since at least the time of Shankaracharya, who lived in the 8th century AD. And it's taken many, many different forms. There's been arguments, then counter-arguments, then counter-arguments, and then counters to those, back and forth, back and forth. 2,500 years ago, Lord Buddha came to this world, and he said that ultimate reality is shunya, empty. He didn't actually say this, but his followers did. That this reality is empty. Ultimate reality is zero. And Shankaracharya came several hundred years after him and said, no, ultimate reality is not zero, it's one. Okay? And Madhvacharya came several hundred years after him and said, ultimate reality is not zero, it's not one, it's two. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came several hundred years after him and said, ultimate reality is not zero, it's not one, it's not two, it's, no, not three either. The logical next step, but it's not three. He says it's 1 and 2. And if you think 1 and 2 equals 3, then you're wrong. Because we'll see in Mahaprabhu's philosophy that's not the case. But just as a little humorous example to start off with, it is said, and I don't know if it is true, but at some point a Mayavadi came to a Vaishnav temple and wrote on the wall of the temple, Soham. Soham, you know, it means I am he, right? So this is the fundamental position of Mayavad. You worship the Ishvara because you are him. You worship the Lord because you will be him. Soham, I am he. So the devotee came the next day, saw that on the wall, and said, oh, that's terrible. So he added just one letter in Sanskrit to that. Da soham. So the Mayavadi came the next day and says, that's wrong. That's terribly wrong. So he adds one more letter to it. Sada soham. Okay, you got to divide it like this. I am always him. Sada means always, soham means I am he. I am always him. So the devotee came back the next day, said that's even worse, and then changed it to, added one more letter. Da sada soham. I am the servant of the Lord's servant, servant of the servant. And then that kind of ends the debate, because you can't add anything else to that. If you add another sa, it just makes it redundant. Sada, sadahom doesn't add anything. So anyway, this debate has been going on for a long, long time. The word that we should actually use that encompasses the system that we're going to talk about is called Advaita. The word Dvaita means two. Advaita means not two. So non-dualism is the term. And the idea of Mayavad is actually a one part of the whole system. The part that talks about Maya, that's called Mayavad. That's the part that we specifically don't like. But non-dualism is the name of the entire system, and it was taught by someone named Shankaracharya, who's often called Adi Shankara, because there have been many Shankaras since then, and it's now become a title that people of his tradition, of his matha, take on for themselves. Is called Shankaracharya. So it's often specified Adi Shankara, or Adi Shankaracharya, the first Shankara. And he was, as I was saying earlier, a man of brilliant intellect. If you read the beginning of his commentary on Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra, which is the most famous commentary, Sharidaka Bhashya, it's beautiful. The language is eloquent. He's concise and precise in the way he writes. His arguments are sharpened and chiseled, like a fine, a fine chisel. He just cuts really deep and very clean in the way he writes. And it's very attractive in the way he works. All of his writing. He was a man of brilliant intellect and a formidable opponent for the Vaishnavacharyas that follow him. I mean, if there's one testament to Shankaracharya's brilliance, is that every single Vaishnavacharya since his time, 800 AD, since that time have found the need to argue against him, to present arguments against him and his followers. We know from our own experience, these Vaishnavacharyas, like Sripad Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in our own line, Jiva Goswami, they're brilliant. We know that. The fact that people who are so brilliant would spend so much time arguing against him means that he was a worthy opponent. Krishna doesn't come down to this world to fight with the little troublemakers of this world, the common criminals that even the government can put into prison. Krishna comes down only to fight with the greatest of asuras, like Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha and so on. When our Vaishnavacharyas choose their opponents in debate, it's because they're worthy opponents. And Adi Shankaracharya was more than a worthy opponent. In fact, Madhvacharya, he says that the Mayavadis, he says, the impersonalists are just asuras, they're demons. And he says that I have come with my goal is particularly to defeat them. He says, I took 3 births in the past. Originally, I was... Yeah, so first I was Hanuman. So he's an incarnation of Vayu, I should mention that. Madhvacharya, he tells us himself. Most acharyas don't tell their swarupa to themselves. Others have to reveal it. But in his own writing, Madhvacharya he describes his own swarupa. He says, I'm Vayu. I'm the Lord's eternal associate. And originally I came down in my first avatar as Hanuman to fight with Ravana and the other Rakshasas. And I led the Lord's army to victory. In my next avatar, I came down as Bhima. And I led the army of the Pandavas to victory against the evil Kshatriyas. In my third avatar, I have come as Madhva, and my goal is to fight these armies of Mayavadis. So he's totally unrelenting. As Gaudiya Vaishnavas, though, we are much kinder and generous towards the impersonalists than he was, genuinely. In fact, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has a lot of respect for Shankaracharya. In his conversation with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he says that Shankaracharya, anything he wrote or said is not actually what he intended, because he says Shankaracharya is the avatar of Lord Shiva, who had been deputed by the Lord specifically to come Mayavadam Asat Shastram, to teach this improper doctrine in order to spread confusion in Kali Yuga. But he himself is not someone who is denigrated as an asura or anything like that. In fact, we will see at the end of this seminar that our Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas find many places of common cause between the impersonalists and the personalists. And Srila Prabhupada, following them, does the same thing as well. Okay? So our stance is a little bit different than Madhvacharya. At the same time, let me say that you will find no greater opponent and more skilled opponent of Mayavad than Madhvacharya. He deserves to say what he said because he also knows, his abilities of logic and argument are incredible. They are so brilliant. They're just very technical. You have to know a lot about Sanskrit and a lot about the technicalities of Nyaya philosophy of logic, and be able to parse the Sanskrit of scriptural statements in order to make sense of what he says. And so therefore we're not actually going to go into a lot of arguments that Madhvacharya uses. Instead, our analysis is going to be based primarily on the arguments of Ramanujacharya, because his arguments are such, they're very hard-hitting. They are the first significant opposition to Mayavad, because Ramanujacharya was much earlier than Madhvacharya. He was like 11th century, and Madhvacharya was more like the 13th century. So he's the earliest. It's very hard-hitting, very comprehensible, his arguments. And then there are also arguments that are used frequently by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Sandarbhas. So they have a tradition of being used within our own Gaudiya Vaishnava line. Okay? So this is who we're talking about, and this is the person that we're dealing with. Okay, so now let's begin with, let's go to page 2 of the projection, please. And let's go to, oops, we missed it. Right there. And if you can make that as large as possible, just a little bit. So let's begin with Vedanta means the study of the Upanishads. The Upanishads are Vedanta. Actually, Vedanta is a name for the Upanishads. The philosophy based on Vedanta, on the Upanishads is often called Vedanta philosophy. But the Vedanta means the Upanishads. They are the end of the Vedas. They are the culmination of the Vedas. And so the Upanishads are what everyone is discussing and debating. All these acharyas, this is the foundation. So let's begin with what is possibly one of the most famous passages in all of the Upanishads. This is from Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 6. Okay? This phrase here, in the beginning, this world was simply what is existent, Sat. Sadeva Somya Idamagra Asit. In the beginning, this world was simply what is existent, one only, without a second. Ekam eva dvitiyam. And it thought to itself, this Sat, this existent being at the beginning, it thought to itself, let me become many, let me propagate myself. Tad aikshata bahusyam prajayeya. And in the beginning, the world was simply what is existent, Sat, one only, without a second, and it thought to itself, let me become many, let me propagate myself. This one sentence encapsulates the essence, the starting point of Vedanta philosophy for everyone. Vaishnavas, Mayavadis, everyone. This is the heart of what Vedanta means as a system. Now let me ask you to identify here in this passage, what are the assumptions that you see embedded here? What is this passage saying about the nature of ultimate reality? This one sentence or two sentences says so much. There's so much information packed into it, and I want you to help me unpack it. What's being said here in this sentence? Tell me even things that are obvious, that are you think that are the simplest things, but I want to unpack everything that's being said in this statement here. Yes, Prabhu.
Krishna, everything emanates from one source.
Everything has a unitary source. Now, this might seem like the most obvious thing for us as devotees, but this is actually a major, major thing. Do you know that of all the 6 systems of philosophy, you're familiar with the 6 systems of philosophy, right? You've heard of them at least. The 6 orthodox systems of philosophy in India, Vedanta is the only one of the 6 which believes in a unitary origin to creation. Sankhya believes in 2 principles, Purusha and Prakriti. Many Purushas, one Prakriti. So not the Vaishnav Sankhya of the Bhagavatam. That's actually, it's different. It's the original Sankhya. But classical Sankhya philosophy, multiple Purushas, one Prakriti. These 2 principles are at the beginning. Vaisheshika philosophy takes in multiple indivisible atoms. There's a finite number of invisible, indivisible atoms that are at the source of creation. Not one, but many, many. Mimamsa. Mimamsa believes in the idea that the laws of this creation, the laws of the universe, are at the foundation of existence. And all the devas, all the gods, are subservient to those laws, right? So it's what you might call, in some sense, a scientific view in the sense of atheistic science, that the laws of nature are what operate, that run everything. Every system of philosophy that you have, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Yoga, Mimamsa, I think I'm forgetting one. I mentioned Yoga. Mimamsa. Anyway, so Nyaya. So Nyaya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Sankhya. Okay, we got them all. So all of them talk about multiple realities at the beginning. And Vedanta is the only system that says Sat eva somyam idam agra asit. At the beginning, there was only one thing. There's one reality, period. And everything else comes from that one reality. Okay, so that's a very important assumption, not one we should take for granted. Everyone agrees on this. This is impersonalist, personalist, doesn't matter. We all agree on this point. What else, yes, does this statement give us?
It is propagating itself rather than creating something else and becoming many.
Yes. So if there's only one reality, then the assumption, then by definition, any creation that emerges has to be from that one reality, right? It has to be a self-expansion. It can't be using something else. It's not the one reality who finds some wood or some Play-Doh or something and makes something from it. Because any wood or Play-Doh you would find is still going to be part of that one reality. So there's creation from its own self. This is called creation ex Deo, or creation from God himself, from his own body. So even the Vedas, the Rig Veda speaks of this. Yes. What else does this statement unpack?
Also it says, like, let me become many. For example, the Nitya Nityanam Chetanas Chetanan Eko Bahunam Vidadati Kaman. So that plurality is also coming from the single truth.
Yes. So then here's the contrast, okay? And here's the tension that's going to exist for this entire seminar. And this is that although there's one reality, in the very next sentence, the Upanishad says, let me become many, let me propagate myself. Multiplicity is embedded in the very nature of this reality. There is no reason this reality, this one being, could not have stayed exactly the way it was. But the reality is, the fact is, that if we look around, our world is a place of multiplicity. It's not just one thing. There's so many people sitting here, and so many buildings in this city, right? This is a world of multiplicity. So how do we account for that? There's the one, and then there's the many. How do we deal with the fact that there is one origin, but many things in this world? How do we reconcile unity and diversity? This is the question of Vedanta philosophy. This is what every Acharya, Vaishnava or not, struggles with. What do we do with these two poles? Do we dissolve the multiplicity and just run it into the singularity? Or do we get rid of the singularity and run it into the multiplicity? Or do we try to hold both in tension with each other? That's essentially the question. There's a couple more things in this statement that need to be unpacked. Okay, yes?
The first phrase, in the beginning, is a little contradictory. So does that mean that there was, what does if there is something in the beginning, then there was then it's prone to end, or there was something before the beginning?
Yes. So this is a very good observation, like a very keen observation. In the beginning means that this creation has a start, and therefore it will have an end, and that there is change and fluctuation. In other words, the universe is not beginningless. This is the story of creation in these two sentences. There was the one, and he thought, let me become many. So there is growth, there is change, And that implies some kind of constant flux of beginning and end, not an eternal universe. Excellent. Okay, I think you had your hand up for a while.
The reality is a person.
Okay, what makes you think that? What makes you think that?
Because it's thinking.
Okay, so we don't quite get personhood here, but we get something really important. And you've pointed out the thing that I was waiting for here, this key word, and it thought to itself. It thought. This is big, right? This is major. Again, every acharya highlights this. Tad aikshata. The word is aikshata, which means to think or to see or to observe. And it thought. Thinking is an attribute that predates creation. Therefore, it is not possible that creation takes place from dead matter. Matter itself cannot create. Or in Srila Prabhupada's phrase, life comes from life. Right? Life has to come from life. This is the sentence that this is life comes from life in the Upanishads. This is the sentence that says it. That Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, everyone will point to this and say, life comes from life. Matter itself cannot be self-creating, it cannot generate itself, it cannot expand, it cannot move, it is dead. Someone has to think, someone has to activate it. That consciousness was there at the start. So whatever was there at the beginning, it was thinking, it was conscious, it was not dead. Is there anything else anyone sees that is packed into this that we haven't mentioned as yet?
More of an observation. So if it is sentient, then why is the word it used? I'm just curious.
So the word it is because the Sanskrit, the word sat is neuter. It's not a he or a she, it's a neuter word. Sanskrit has 3 genders, he, she, and it. So right now, and always usually, the Upanishads are very coy about identifying who this Brahman is and who this Sat is. This is for the acharyas later on, the scriptures later on to unpack. Scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam and the Puranas in general. But here, they're very, very subtle and very coy about this. They're just saying it. It was there at the beginning. The word Brahman, also Sat and also Brahman, is a neuter word. So we can give it content as we need to. It's a generic term for God that does not identify God as male or female. Yes?
There is desire, and desire means person.
Okay, excellent. So not only is there a thought, but there is desire. Now, here, the Vaishnavas start to get really, really excited, okay? This is where we're coming to what Mataji said here about personhood. We're starting to see the glimmers of that. Because it's not just some abstract thought. That thought shows up in the form of desire. Let me become many. The let me is bahusyam prajayeya. It's an optative form. There's a push there. We should do this. We have to do this. And other places in the Upanishads, it's described that this multiplicity, this push to become many, the desire is identified as the desire for pleasure, for enjoyment, for ananda. We know ananda mayo bhyasat, right? Raso vaisaha, he is rasa. So that is identified elsewhere. It's that desire that propels this becoming of this expansion in manyness. Okay? So that's also there in this phrase. Anything else that hasn't been covered so far that you find in okay, yes, please.
It says, let me become many. So each one of us our God, can be argument like that. Because I came from him,
Yes.
So I can be.
So we can't go that far because the manyness includes not just living beings, but also the material world, the world of matter. But it's a fact that the Lord here is not just the creator, but the substance of creation as well. He's not the one he's not only the nimitta karana, or the instrumental cause, the efficient cause, but he's also the substantive cause, the upadanaka, the material cause. He is the stuff of this creation. Everything we see around us is all a product of that same one reality. So this, again, opens doors to personalism. If that one reality is personal, that means everything is personal, including rocks. Remember? But if that one reality is impersonal, then everything is impersonal. This is why personalism and impersonalism matters so much. What we think of this one reality, Brahman, makes such a big difference. Because everything emanates from it, therefore what you have at the start is what you have at the end. The whole world is shaped in that way. Brilliant. Anything else that needs to be unpacked? Maybe one more.
I think you already mentioned everything merges back into one.
Huh?
Everything merges back into one.
Not here. Not in this statement, it's not going back, but you are absolutely right. Right after this, okay? And this is a great segue to what comes next. Because right after this, there's the one reality. It thinks, let me become many, let me propagate myself. Now we've got many. And then in the next passage, the Chandogya Upanishad collapses that many into one again, where you get the very famous passage, Tat Tvam Asi, which means you are. Oops. That thou art. You are that. Tat Tvam Asi. You are that. Probably among the three most famous words of the Upanishads, thanks to Shankaracharya. So, two reasons. One is this statement you can see is the foundation of what is impersonalism, what is Vedanta philosophy, personal or impersonal. This is the heart of it. And the second thing is I wanted to show you just how much is packed into the Upanishads. These works we don't read so much, but we do have Isha Upanishad, and Prabhupada has long purports on these small verses, right? The reason for that is because there's so much embedded in the Upanishads. I mean, we just got, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe more, key principles of our philosophy from 2 sentences of the Upanishads. And I'm sure if we kept going with your suggestions, we would find more that's embedded in just these 2 sentences. This is how rich the Upanishads are. This is why they are the foundation of Vedanta philosophy, is because there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Okay, now let's, we've got 9:30, okay, we've got time. So let's move to the next page of the handout, please. And now that the one unity has been multiplied, now we're going to collapse it. So I see some hands for questions, but give me about maybe 10 more minutes or 15 minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions for everyone. Okay. So this is just the next chapter down. Chapters aren't very long in the Chandogya Upanishads, so this is not too far at all. So here's the scene in this Chandogya chapter 6. Shankaracharya writes one of his most brilliant commentaries on this chapter of chapter 6 of Chandogya, but all Vaishnavacharyas deal with it because Shankaracharya dealt with it. He kind of set the standard for this being the heart of the Upanishads. So there's a little boy named Shvetaketu. And he comes after 12 years of education in the forest in the Gurukul. 12 years of education means he's gone from kindergarten through high school. And he's come back, and his father, Uddalaka Aruni, asks him, so you have learned now? And the Upanishad says he comes back swell-headed, very, a little bit proud and thinking that he knows it all. And his father asks him a simple question. Do you know that thing which underlies everything else? That unites, the fundamental question of the Upanishads. That one reality that brings everything together. And he says, no, my teacher never taught me about that. So he says, then how is your education complete? And to his credit, to the boy's credit, even though he's a little swell-headed, he can't tolerate the fact that he doesn't know this. And he goes to his father and he says, Father, you please teach me, because I never learned that. And so the father takes on the role of guru and gives him this famous instruction that is taught in a beautiful way. He is teaching in a way that is, actually, let me read it for you, and then you'll see how it's taught. You can experience it for yourself before I tell you. One thing I should mention here, the translation here for the previous passage and this one is done by Patrick Olivelle. Patrick Olivelle is a professor of South Asian Studies and Sanskrit language at University of Texas in Austin, and a really good translation. If anyone wants to read a basic translation of the Upanishads, I would recommend his translation. It's not a Vaishnav translation, but it's also not an impersonalist translation. He's just sticking really close to the Sanskrit and very historically knowledgeable. He's translating words in the way that they are read and meant in the Upanishads and in the Vedas in that time period. Okay, so it's a good baseline to begin with, and then we can understand it in Vaishnav terms or in impersonalist terms, depending on one's preferences. But he doesn't try to move the ship in one way or the other necessarily. So it would be wonderful. It would be wonderful if at some point one of Srila Prabhupada's own followers came out with a translation and commentary on the Upanishads, because it's something that really is now so popular. Upanishads are so popular in the Western world. People read it all the time. They appreciate it. And it's not as direct as the Bhagavatam is, of course, but it is the foundation of Vedanta philosophy. There is no Vedanta without the Upanishads, period. And Prabhupada says that in order for bhakti to be factual in study, we need to know Vedanta. So he teaches them with different parables, okay, different examples. And there are multiple parables. I've chosen 4 here to read for you. So follow along as I read on the screen. Now, take these rivers, son. The easterly ones flow towards the east. The westerly ones flow towards the west. From the ocean, they merge into the very ocean. They become just the ocean. In that state, they are not aware that I'm that river and I'm this river. In exactly the same way, son, when all these creatures reach the existent, they are not aware that we are reaching the existent. So existent means Sat or Brahman. No matter what they are in this world, whether it is a tiger, a lion, a wolf, a boar, a worm, a moth, a gnat, or a mosquito, they all merge into that. The finest essence here, that constitutes the self, Atman, of this whole world. That is the truth. That is the self, Atma. And that's how you are, Shvetaketu. That final phrase, that's how you are, is Olivell's translation of Tat Tvam Asi. And this is the greatest gift that Olivelle has given to the Vaishnavas, because he does not assume that Tat Tvam Asi means, and you are that. There's a very subtle but clear difference, right? That's how you are. That's what you are. There's 2 different things here. You are that versus that's how you are. 2 different things. And he leaves it open as to how we're going to read this phrase. I will show you how Shankaracharya versus Ramanujacharya read this statement, Tat Tvam Asi, but Olivelle leaves it open for us. Okay. Next one, paragraph 11. Yeah. Now, take this huge tree here, son. If someone were to hack it at the bottom, its living sap would flow. Likewise, if someone were to hack it in the middle, its living sap would flow. If someone were to hack it at the top, its living sap would flow. Pervaded by the living jiva essence, atma, jivatma. This tree stands here, ceaselessly drinking water and flourishing. When, however, life, jiva, leaves one of its branches, that branch withers away. When it leaves a second branch, that likewise withers away. And when it leaves a third branch, that also withers away. When it leaves the entire tree, the whole tree withers away. In exactly the same way, he continued, know that this, of course, dies. This, he's pointing to himself, his body. Know that this dies when it is bereft of life, jiva. But life itself does not die. The finest essence here, that constitutes the self of this whole world. That is the truth. That is the self, Atma. And that's how you are, Shvetaketu. Okay, so you get the refrain here. That constitutes the self of this whole world. that is the truth, that is the self, and that's how you are, Shvetaketu. That's the chorus at the end of each one. Okay, the next two are the key ones that I want you to focus on. Sir, teach me more. Very well, son. Actually, it would be useful to have someone to do this with, someone to be Shvetaketu. Who wants to be Shvetaketu? Okay, you be Shvetaketu. You have a mic? Here's the mic right here. Okay, ready? Bring a banyan fruit.
Here it is, sir.
Cut it up.
I've cut it up, sir.
What do you see there?
These quite tiny seeds, sir.
Now take one of them and cut it up.
I've cut one up, sir.
What do you see there?
Nothing, sir.
The finest essence here, that you can't even see. Look how on account of that finest essence, this huge banyan tree stands here. Believe, my daughter, the finest essence here. We have to update the Upanishads a little bit. So, the finest essence here, that constitutes the self of this whole world. That is the truth, that is the self, Atma, and that's how you are, Shvetaketu.
Sir, teach me more.
Very well, daughter. Put this chunk of salt in a container of water and come back tomorrow. Okay, so you do as you are told, and then I tell you, the chunk of salt that you put in the water last evening, bring it here. Okay, so now she gropes for it but could not find it because it had dissolved completely. Now take a sip from that corner. How does it taste?
Salty.
Take a sip from the center. I don't know how you would do that, but take a sip from the center. How does it taste?
Salty.
Take a sip from the corner, from that corner. How does it taste?
Salty.
Throw it out and come back later. So she does as she was told, and she finds that the salt was always there. So presumably she throws it out onto a rock, it dries, and the salt emerges again. You, of course, did not see it there, yet it was always right there. The finest essence here, that constitutes the self of this whole world. That is the truth, that is the self, Atma, and that's how you are, Shvetaketu.
Sir, teach me more.
Not today, daughter. So, this is the famous Tattvam Asi section. That's the self, that's the Atma, and Tattvam Asi. That's who you are, Shvetaketu. Okay? You are that. The same essence in a moth, in a gnat, in a mosquito, the same essence in a boar or in a cow, you are that too. Okay? So this should ring very clearly of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. But it's a little more problematic, right? Actually, from the perspective of Shankaracharya, this is wonderful. Many rivers merging into the one ocean. Do they know that they're separate rivers when they merge? Nope, they're part of that one. The salt is different from the water, right? But when you mix it in, can you see the salt? Nope, not there. So Shankaracharya has a wonderful time with this particular passage. And what does he do? What does he make of it? So what I want to do now is to describe to you the building blocks of Shankaracharya's system. We're going to move relatively quickly through his system. It's really interesting the way that he builds it block by block and puts it all together. And in the end, you have a world that is perfectly unitary, that is perfectly one, and without suffering, only containing the bliss of Brahmananda. Okay? So I'm going to take you on that journey after breakfast. But before that, I want to see, we've got about 20 minutes. Are there any questions so far about the material that we have covered? And there are a bunch of questions. I'll begin with Shvetaketu since she participated so well here, and then move on to others.
So initially you were mentioning how you went to this one festival and all the different like booths were named after the guru, and one of how you were talking about how one of the biggest parts of Mayavad philosophy is how guru is God. But we also like see similar things being said in our Shastra, like in the Guru Vashtikam it says Sakshadritvena. So I was wondering, how can we differentiate between like the two philosophies in this way?
Yeah, wonderful question. Srila Prabhupada says that, or actually the Upanishads say, that spiritual life is like a razor's edge. And what that means is that the distinction between what counts as impersonalism and personalism is very, very fine. In that verse, Sakshad Haritvena Samasta Shastre, everything hinges on just one letter, one syllable, Tva. Sakshad Haritva. Had it said Sakshad Hari, it would have been a big problem. Sakshad Hari means you are Hari yourself, you are Krishna. Sakshad Haritva, the little syllable Tva, changes it to the quality of Hari, Hariness. So chair and chairtva. Chairtva is the quality of being a chair. Okay, so Haritva is the quality of being Hari. So you have the same qualities as Hari. Why? Kintu prabhorya priya evatasya. Just in case someone misses that tva and thinks that you might actually be Krishna, he adds the word kintu. Sakshad haritvena samasta shastre uktas tathabhav yathaeva sadbhi. Everyone says that you are of the same quality as Hari, kintu. So just be careful, right? The reason this is the case, you are of the same quality of Hari, not because you are Hari, kintu prabhorya priya evatasya, because you are very dear to Lord Hari. Kintu prabhorya priya evatasya, you're dear to him, right? So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is being very, very careful with his words here. He identifies that the Guru has the same quality as the Lord, but then he explains the reason why he's the same quality. Not because he's the same person, but because he's dear to that person. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu.
You mentioned that a lot of people are reading these translations of the Upanishads by Olivelle. And I was just wondering, what are they getting out of it? And what do you think devotees would get out of it if they read those translations?
So, that's a good question. I think most people when they read the Upanishads, they get a generic sense of the unity of all things. They are able to rise to the platform of what we would call Brahman realization. They're able to understand the unity of all creation and our own participation in that unity, kind of like what people get when they read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha or they read Autobiography of a Yogi. It's a sense of fulfillment. There's a sense of peace there and some joy also. The type of joy that they get, we will talk about later in this seminar. Our acharyas explained very clearly what the joy of Brahman is. There is a joy there, and it's a very particular kind, but that kind of mental peace and unity, I think they're getting from it. For devotees, I don't think, honestly, we would get a whole lot from the Upanishads, in that a lot of what we find in the Upanishads is already given in more compact form in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And other sections of the Bhagavatam. So there's no kind of new knowledge there. The Upanishads, from our perspective, culminate in the Isha Upanishad. Actually, the Isha Upanishad traditionally has been the first of all the Upanishads. Scholars don't put it at the beginning because they say it was later composed than the other ones, but even Shankaracharya puts Isha Upanishad at the beginning. So because the knowledge of the Upanishads is ever so gradually brings you to the point of saying, okay, this Sat and this Brahman that existent at the beginning actually could be the Lord, right? Isha. And Isha is a male pronoun, it's not it, it's not a neuter noun, right? So by the point of the Isha Upanishad, the Upanishads are ready to say, and Shvetashvatara Upanishad, which is the other one that our acharyas quote a lot. The Upanishads are ready to say, okay, this might be a person actually. And it might actually be a he, and actually it might even be, like that. So they're coming to that point. And it can be a little slow for devotees. The main use for devotees is in terms of understanding what the foundations are of our philosophy and in relating to people for whom the Upanishads are very fascinating, right? That can be a very useful perspective, both for other learned audiences around the world and for popular audiences who find the Upanishads fascinating, on both ends. So you find laypersons who are just fascinated by the Upanishads, and then you find really advanced audiences who really do ground their ideas. And unless you're able to say Nityo Nityanam, Chetanas Chetananam, or you're able to say Hiranmayena Patrena Satyasya, you're able to quote a few verses, it's like your philosophy is not grounded properly, right? So on both ends, the Upanishads are useful, but really for the devotees, it can be... the Upanishads seem to say a lot of things in a slightly confusing way that makes intelligent people go, oh, there's something deep here. But for devotees, it's kind of easy to cover it really quickly in one chapter of the Gita and then kind of move on from that point. So, yes.
This is a question from Vaikunth Nayak Das Prabhu. He's watching you from India.
Okay.
And so he says, question on anthropomorphism and anthropocentrism. You gave example of river and how impersonalism fosters exploitation. But Western civilizations based on anthropocentrism have cleaner rivers.
Yes.
But India on anthropomorphism is having polluted rivers. So is the level of impersonalism so dangerously higher in India, higher than that in Western countries? Or is there some aspect of anthropomorphism by which Indians can worship and pollute at the same time?
So I would say neither of those two options. Here's the thing. It's not that the Western countries have less impersonalism than India does. The whole world is overcome by the same thing, more or less. The reality is that in the Western countries, if you looked at the state of our rivers, up until, I don't know, just 50 years ago, they were horrific. They were horrific. The rivers in the Ohio Valley, for example, were so badly polluted that they were toxic, just like the Yamuna and the Ganga are today. Eventually, we came to realize that just for our own sake, just for our own survival, we need to take care of this. But it's not enough. That change is not fast enough. It's not good enough, because the bottom line, the problematic approach there is that if you are suffering from that situation, you will do something to fix it. But if you are not directly affected, you do not care, right? Because it's all based on how this is useful for me. The challenge with India is that India is determined to go down the same route as the West. Let's make ourselves industrialized, let's pollute everything we can, and then we will figure out what we're going to do. This is essentially the argument that every developing country gives to questions of environment is, you got your chance to pollute, give us our chance to. And it's a very poor argument. In fact, there was a wonderful editorial I read a couple years ago in the Indian Express by a thinker named Madhu Kishwar. And she argued, she said, look, India is a country that is still not addicted to fossil fuels. The majority of Indians still like to go in cycle rickshaws. In fact, Delhi has tried in every way to get rid of cycle rickshaws by outlawing them in large portions of the city, by applying fines on those rickshaws. But the rickshawalas have just increased the price to accommodate the fines, and people still ride them, right? The average Indian is not addicted to the fossil fuels like we are. Why should we go, this was her argument, why should we go down that route and then back up when we know the consequences of what this approach is? So it's the same mentality of industrialism, of impersonalism that is overtaking the world, including India. It's just India is just 2 or 3 steps behind the West. The question really is, can the world afford to do to itself what the United States did to itself and then learned from? If the rest of the world's population does what the top 5% do, can we survive? Or is it going to be too late? So it's not an advantage or a disadvantage. It's just the same trajectory, just maybe 50, maybe 100 years behind. And we know exactly what's to come. If we follow the same track, we're going to get more or less the same results. But we've got another option. We've got a better choice to make. Okay, so let's start from the front and then we'll work our way back. Yes.
I had a question regarding the salt.
Yes.
And it was talking about, is this like, Shankaracharya uses this, like, I don't know if I'm correct on this, but Shankaracharya uses this as an argument for merging into Brahman and like us being qualitatively the same.
Not exactly merging. As we'll see, the idea of merging is actually it's one of the forms of popular Mayavad that actually don't work at all. Because if something merges, then what can happen? It can unmerge, right? If anything goes in, it can come out. If there's some change, that which is born can always die, right? And after death, it will take birth again. Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityur, dhruvam janma mritasya cha, Krishna says. So if you're killing your individuality, it can take rebirth again. And so that kind of merging, although possible, is not actually the one that Shankaracharya is looking for. But he does use this in a generic sense of saying, yes, there is this unity that is present, that actually everything is composed, is constituted within Brahman. It is one. Yes. We'll understand the distinction of merging, not merging a little later.
Yeah,
yes.
So my question was, before the salt went into like the container, the water did not have the quality of being salty, and the salt was completely individual. So if we have the same qualities as Krishna after we leave, after we quote unquote not merge, but I don't know the correct word for it, but the water wasn't salty when the salt wasn't there, but it was only salty after the salt entered the water. And once the water was gone, the water and the salt were separate again. The water was no longer salty again. So
yes. Well, I was going to give the Vaishnava interpretation later, but why not? We can do it now. The salt metaphor actually works beautifully for us, as you've been pointing out. You're walking us down that path, right? The salt was distinct from the water. It goes in, it is the water, right? We are part of Krishna, and our qualities are Krishna's qualities. Krishna's qualities are our qualities in small portion. But even when the salt is dissolved, does it lose its individuality? Does it actually become one? No. What does he do afterwards? Shvetaketu comes back and the father says, throw out the water, and he finds that the salt was always there. You can never, ever get rid of the individuality. It only appears as if the individuality is gone. Merging is a really poor solution to the human condition. We can merge, it feels like we become one, but look what's left at the end. We're still separate. Bhagavatam says, Aruhya krichena parampadam tata patantyadho nadrita yushmadangraya. We can rise to that highest platform, become one, and then we become two again. We fall from that position because the soul cannot remain one always, right? So we've got our individual quality, in this case saltiness. We've got our individual identity as salt. We can merge for some time, but that individuality is never ever lost. You can feel the salt's difference, the presence of the salt, even when you can't see it. It's there, right? It's there. Yes, bro.
Thank you, Prabhu, for beautifully explaining some of these concepts. I particularly like the example that you mentioned about the touchstone. It looks like a stone, and you're mentioning the story of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. I mean, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is considered Krishna because of this episode, so I like that particularly. The question I have is, what is the difference between impersonalism and Mayavadi? And maybe later on you might also cover what are different forms of impersonalism we see, Brahmakumaris and all this, and how can we understand and refute them also?
Yes. So we in this seminar we won't speak about particular institutions or groups, simply because many of these institutions have some aspects of devotionalism in them, and some Buddhist traditions, for example, are very, very devotional in their nature. They've got bhakti present there, and yet they're often mixed with impersonalism. So often we have to be like swans. We have to separate the milk from the water. And if we're not expert enough to do that, then we should in general avoid it, right? So that we don't get mixed up with the water. But the reality is that you can find in both directions. And like I said at the beginning of the seminar, the goal is to purify ourselves of Mayavad, not necessarily to engage in Mayavad bashing, because you've got different groups, and each one is progressing at a different level. So the question of the difference between impersonalism and Mayavad is a very good one. The only way to answer that is to define what Mayavad is, and we'll do that in just after breakfast. That's going to come, and then at that point, I think it'll be easier to answer. If the question is not answered after that point, then please ask it again, and I'll clarify more clearly. Yes.
In Bhagavata, many places we like the Lord is described as a person, Kshatriyas are feet, Stris are his hairs. So how we fit in this context? You plan to cover somewhere that description?
Yeah. So your question is,
like in Bhagavatam, the
yes,
absolute
there's this description.
Yeah. So it's like more an impersonal description of the Lord. So how we understand this with this philosophical context?
Yeah. So how is the world, the body of the Lord, is going to be a very important topic, if not today, tomorrow. Okay, we're gonna spend a good amount of time on that.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu, for the amazing class. My question was about using analogies to explain something. Could you share some thoughts on that? We in our Vaishnav tradition also we use some analogies. Even impersonalists use. Even analogies could be used to explain any point. So ultimately, does it boil down to every individual follows what he or she wants to follow, and analogies are just given to explain what that person has faith in?
Yes. So we're going to actually spend a lot of time with analogies here, because the argument between the impersonalists and the personalists often happens on the basis of analogies. Now, let me, as a segue to what's going to happen after breakfast, let me mention this, that analogies never prove anything. They are meant to illustrate what you can otherwise prove. Okay? They give you an example to help you make sense of anything. But any analogy, by its very nature, is going to be limited. It will not work beyond a certain point. This is why an analogy can never serve as a proof. It helps us make sense of something, but we need to prove it using principles and arguments, and analogies then illustrates it for us. Let me give you a simple example. Krishna's eyes are like the petals of a lotus. That's one of the most common, Pundarikaksha, one of the most common analogies you find in Srimad Bhagavatam. But that analogy has its limits, right? We cannot then go on to say, therefore his neck is like the stem of a lotus and his chest is like the lake of the mud inside. You can't push it, right? You have to stop at a certain point, and his eyes wilt like the petals of a lotus wilt over time. No, right? There's a specific, what is the analogy being compared in regard to? The Nyaya philosophers are very clear about that. What is the point of comparison? Make sure you know that when you make the comparison. The point of comparison here is the beauty of Krishna's eyes and maybe the shape of his eyes, and that's it. Nothing else is being compared in this case. Okay? So the same thing here, we will get many philosophical comparisons being made very soon. We'll talk about rope and snake, we'll talk about all kinds of exciting metaphors. All of them, we have to be clear, they're not proving anything. And any of those metaphors, you push them hard enough and they will collapse. Okay?
Yes. Prabhu, I have two questions.
Yes.
Just to what you said, that the metaphors are meant to serve a particular point. But soon in the arguments, as you have explained in your previous seminars also, the acharyas argue on the metaphors and then they establish their own point as well. So isn't like taking the metaphor of the author beyond its purpose and then refuting the author?
Yes, but as they argue on the basis of the metaphor, they argue about the metaphor, they're arguing exactly about that thing which the metaphor is being used for. They're not arguing beyond that, right? They're not saying, well, we'll see when we talk about the rope and snake, they're not arguing about the house or even the man who comes out and gets the confusion. They're not arguing about the fact that it's nighttime or the sun is shining or there's flowers growing in the garden. It's just on the point about which the metaphor is being made, right? That's what they're disagreeing about. So they're very clear about that. We can't argue out here. It has to be on this topic.
My second question is that you are, if I'm right, if you're mentioning in your previous seminars that our Goswamis take many of the arguments of Ramanujacharya. What about Baldev Vidyabhushan? Does he take more arguments from Madhvacharya or he also follows?
He does. So in Baladev Vidyabhushana you find more of an influence of Madhvacharya's arguments because Baladev Vidyabhushana, before he became a Gaudiya Vaishnava, was a follower of Madhvacharya. He writes about this himself. And so he explains Achintya Bheda Bheda in a slightly different way than Srila Jiva Goswami by introducing this concept of Vishesha, which is drawn from Madhvacharya's Vedanta. But Jiva Goswami and the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, as far as I'm able to tell, are much more influenced by Vishishtadvaita philosophy of Ramanujacharya. And my own knowledge is primarily of the 6 Goswamis, particularly Jiva Goswami, and so that's where is usually my starting point for this discussion. But if someone were to focus primarily on Baladev Vidyabhushana, you would find the influence of both Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya also significantly.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Prabhu, earlier in the presentation you said, bhakti based on Vedic, otherwise it's not real bhakti. Now, I'm not a great reader and I'm not sure about the Vedas in detail. What I've heard is, that Vedas are much more impersonal. So, I have met few guests at this temple says, I want to enroll my kid based on Vedic school. Do you have a Sunday school? And blah, blah. Anyways, so if we get an argument that Vedas are impersonal, how do you, and then the next statement, the beginning of this class is, Bhakti should be based on Vedas. And of course, we always say we want to live a Vedic lifestyle. So how do you mix these two and how do you argue on that?
Yes. So first of all, the Vedas, as in, we have to be clear what we mean by Vedas. Vedic literature includes everything from the Rig Veda to Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. All of this is Vedic literature in the sense that it is bringing the intention of the Vedas down, right? So it's in pursuance of the Vedic version. When by Vedas, if we mean specifically the 4, Rig, Yajur, Sam and Atharva Vedas, these 4 are neither personal nor impersonal. They are ritual texts. They give us hymns to use, mantras to use in the performance of yajna, in sacrifice, in order to get certain wishes fulfilled. Desire for progeny, desire to kill your enemies, desire to go to heaven at the end of this life. That's what the Vedas talk about. Traigunyo Vishaya Veda, Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna. So the Vedas are not personal or impersonal. In fact, when most people say, I want to give my children, I want them to study the Vedas, they don't mean the Vedas, not those 4 Vedas. Because that would mean training your kids in Vedic incantations to make sure this person falls in love with you, or this person goes to heaven, or this person... Those sorts of things is not what people are actually interested in. When people say they want to study the Vedas, what they actually mean is Vedanta. They mean the Upanishads. And Upanishads are tending towards more of the impersonal side, unless we know how to read them properly under the guidance of the Vaishnavacharyas. If you see Shankaracharya, he is in bliss in his commentary on the Upanishads, on Chandogya, he's joyful. And when he's commenting on Bhagavad Gita, he's struggling. Not bad, but it's a little more of a struggle. Ramanujacharya, when he's commenting on the Upanishads, he's got to work. when he's commenting on Bhagavad Gita, he's in bliss. He's in his element. And in general, scholars, if you talk to them, they'll say, well, Ramanujacharya's commentary on Bhagavad Gita is hard to beat. Like he's a fish in water there. And Shankaracharya is really a fish in water with the Upanishads. This is where he's comfortable with, right? So the Upanishads they're not Mayavad. They're impersonalist. This comes to the distinction. They're introducing the impersonal idea of Brahman, of that one ultimate reality, which we accept. There's nothing wrong with that one all-pervading reality, as we shall see later. But they don't speak too much far beyond that, except when you get to the Ishopanishad and the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. And this is why Srila Prabhupada specifically gave us the Ishopanishad, is because that is kind of the point at which the Upanishads start to talk about things that actually, they're the culmination of their impersonalist ideas that are presented in the Ishopanishad.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. This statement that in the beginning this world was simply what is existent, is it applies to Krishna or it is applied to Lord Brahma? Brahma may also think the same way. It's what?
Yes. So some acharyas interpret this in relation to Brahman or in relation to Krishna, the absolute truth, and others interpret it in relation to Brahma. But the primary interpretation is in relation to Brahman. So if you look at this statement is the Vishaya Vakya, it's the main statement in relation to this fifth sutra, Vedanta Sutra, Ikshater na Shabdam. So in the beginning, it was someone who thought, who had consciousness, not Prakriti is not the creator. So all the acharyas agree. You can add a secondary meaning in relation to Brahma creating, but the primary meaning, all the acharyas agree, has to do with Brahman, has to do with the absolute truth, or in our terms, Krishna creating this world.
Prabhuji, Tattvamasi, one statement you took here. I was wondering, where does this statement falls? Aham Brahmasmi. Where did this statement falls?
Yeah, so there are many Mahavakyas, statements that Shankaracharya identifies as key statements in Vedanta and in the Upanishads, and we'll speak about them. So Aham Brahmasmi is another example, but Tattvamasi is the king of all of them. Yes. So, yes. Okay, we need to end soon here.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, very nice lecture and very dear to my heart. Brahma Sutra, it is the one, I am no one to complain, but there is one complaint I have about Ved Vyas, how he is writing Brahma Sutra, is after he says Shastra Yonitvat, he never says that, he says that because it has been said so, because it has not been said so. In the interpretations we find that, they refer to Chandogya and Svetasvatara and sometimes even Puranas and all those things. So, what was the reason? What he wanted to keep it brief, that's why he did not explain. What was the reason he did not really refer to a particular Upanishad or, Shastra, what he is referring to?
Yeah. The Vedanta Sutra is not a book in the way that we think of a book. It's not a philosophy argument the way we think of philosophical arguments. The Vedanta Sutra is a series of sutras, aphorisms, that are very, very short, and they are impossible to understand and translate. If someone says, I'll give you a translation of the Upanishads, that's objective. Sorry, not Upanishads, Vedanta Sutra, that is objective, that doesn't take any sampradaya into account, then don't believe them. There's no such thing as an objective translation of the Vedanta Sutra, because the Vedanta Sutra, if you just take the literal meaning of the words, does not make sense. And the reason for that is because it was never made to be used like that. It's not like the Upanishads, it's not like the Puranas, it's not like the Vedas. The Vedanta Sutra are aphorisms that are meant to be used as hooks, mnemonic devices to help the teacher and the student remember a particular teaching. So when you say Shastra Yonitvat, that reminds the teacher that this is all these things that I have to teach you about. And these are the things I need to explain. And oh yeah, Shastra Yonitvat reminds me of this statement in the Upanishads. and I need to explain to you this section of the Upanishads. Think of it like this. The Vedanta Sutra is a key to the Upanishads. Like an index. So when you hear the sutra, Ikshater na shabdam, then the teacher immediately remembers this passage of the Upanishads we just read. Sadeva somyam idam agrasi tadaikshata bahusyam. And says, okay, let's go to the Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 6. I'm going to explain that to you. Okay? And then you explain the Upanishads. So it's a key to the Upanishads. It's not meant to be read on its own. And when people try to do that, it becomes all totally confusing. That's what okay, we need to end here really quickly because I want to get the person behind you real quick. He's had his hand up for a while, and then we conclude here. So,
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Yes. Thank you for the wonderful knowledge, spiritual knowledge. So my question is, so I had two questions. First one is, when we expand the scope of the text that we are inferring from, then we are bound to meet with contradictions, especially when it is expanding along the scope of the Upanishads or including the Vedic texts. Then literally if we look at verses, then there can be literal contradictions, and there to stitch them together we see that some who explain may take a figurative stance toward one and a literal stance toward other. Now it becomes, so is there any general rule as to should we take some statements in the literal sense or in the figurative sense, or is it driven by our de facto belief in the first place?
Yeah, so this is a great question to end on, because the basic principle is that we take the direct meaning, and only when the direct meaning does not work, then we move to the secondary meaning. Okay, this is the general principle of interpretation. You begin with the primary meaning, the mukhya vritti. If the mukhya vritti doesn't work, then you go to the lakshana vritti, the indirect. This everyone agrees upon. Okay, this everyone agrees upon. The question is, when do you know that the primary meaning is not working? Okay, that's the heart of the question. And this is why you need an acharya. This is why it's so important to have the acharya, you have to have the teacher, we have the shelter of Srila Prabhupada, because otherwise, this Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami describes in Chaitanya Charitamrita that the scriptures are a vast ocean, and these philosophies and these philosophers are like crocodiles in this ocean of philosophy who are ready to eat us up at any moment. And really, if you study each philosophy for long enough time, it starts to make sense. Everything makes sense. And then you read the next philosopher, and the one you just read doesn't make any sense at all. Because the next one contradicts him really, really well. And it goes on and on and on, and there is no end to this. It's been going on for thousands of years. It will continue to go on. The luminaries of our own time write and contradict Jesus. This is what the academic world is all about. This is the nature of scholarship. It used to happen in Sanskrit, now it happens in English. And people write, and the greatest theory, and everyone's talking about it and citing it at the conference this year, those people are literally worshipped. And you come 2 years later to the same conference, and what those theories are so dated, and we've really moved beyond it, and there are things that I need to question about those theories, and we've go from modernism to postmodernism to postmodernism. So in this way, it goes on, right? So that's why having the acharya is like having a boat in the ocean with the crocodiles, is that you've got some way to navigate through them. Otherwise, it's really tough. It's really tough to make our way through.
Thank you, Prabhuji. One very pressing question that I've been having from long. So if you could also explain the relevance of the counter arguments that you will be quoting to Achintya Veda, that will be very helpful.
Yes, that's coming. That's coming for sure. So 100%. I really think we need to stop here. Holding devotees back from prasadam is one of the greatest offenses that a speaker can do. And I don't want to be guilty of Vaishnava Aparadh here. So there will be time for more questions after the next section. Thank you all so much. Please come back.
Sharira Vijaja Jodendriya Tahika Jive Vele Vishaya Shagare Dharma Jivayati Loba Moisu Dhurmati Take Jeta Katita Samsare Krishna Bora Doya Moy Kori Bare Chihwachai Shaprashadana Dilobahai Shayanamrita Pao Radha Krishna Gunagao Preme Dako Shri Chaitanya Nitai Preme Dako Shri Chaitanya Nitai Mahaprasade Govinde Nama Brahmani Vaishnave Sapa Punya Vatam Rajan Vishwaso Navija Prasade Sarva Dukanam Hani Rasyo Pajayate Prasana Chetaso Yashu Hudi Parya Vadishtate Twayopa Bhukta Shaganda Lasalankara Charchitaha Uchishta Bojino Dasas Tavamayam Jayemahi Bhagavat Shri Mahaprasadaki Goda Premanande Nitai Goda Haribo 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 Nitai Goda Haribo. Please come take prasadam.